morning and welcome to the Full Scottish on Broadcasting Scotland. We are here today with Ken McDonald from iScot magazine and with Dr. Craig Dalzell, Head of Policy of Commonweal.
Hello.
So, we're going to start off with our favourite topic this week. As last week and the week before that, and I reckon it's going to be for the next couple of weeks as well. We just had a not so meaningful vote 2.5 this week, and this is what we're looking forward to for the beginning of this week as well. So, any thoughts on that?
I'm fed up with it. I'm sick, tired to the back teeth of Brexit. It's just getting to the ridiculous stages now, and some adult somewhere has to put their hand up and say, enough kids, let's try and focus on the task ahead and let's try and achieve something. As it is, it's just a playground rant. It seems to be. I don't know what you make it.
It's interesting that in her speech after the vote, Theresa May said that she thought that we were approaching the limits of what could be done in the House, but then immediately just said, right, nothing's changing, I'm going to bring it back next week for a fourth go. So we still don't know what's going to happen. There is going to be another round of indicative votes looking at all the various options, but at the last round nothing got a majority. Some of the options did better than others. It's interesting that the option that got the most votes was for a second EU referendum.
Which is an option that we all kind of intermittently forget about because it just doesn't seem...
Yep. Although the option that had the narrowest majority was for a UK-wide customs union, which is one of the options that has been entertained at some point. It does breach one of the UK's 3 major red lines, but all of the options breach at least one of the UK's 3 lines. The red lines are mutually exclusive. They were never going to work.
Absolutely, and especially considering that these are red lines set by Theresa May, who appears to be on her way out. It's interesting that we're having
this was
more or less on her way out. At least this is the first time that we've heard her say that she's quite happy to.
We just don't know what's going on. I mean, for people like ourselves that are immersed in politics probably 24/7, 365, just imagine the average Joe and Jane that's trying to follow what's going on. If we can't comprehend what's going to happen within several hours' time, never mind days or weeks ahead, what do they make of this? And these are people that have votes that will determine whether or not we're actually going to be either in Europe or out Europe. And we argued before that the 17.4 million or 17.5 million were actually fed narrative from the press and some high-profile individuals that this was going to be sunny uplands. And they're suddenly realising, why are we not getting what we asked for? And I don't understand what they're talking about, and why are we so bogged down in procedure? This is absolutely crazy stuff. So it really is, I mean, apart from being interesting times, it's just baffling. I mean, it's just very, very difficult to predict what's going to happen next. You never know.
And you can feel the frustration in Westminster, especially with the mob that is currently really haunting and harassing the MPs coming out of it. There's a real level of miseducation, of uninformed. I saw a clip of this one woman who said that she didn't even know that we were part of Europe until we were leaving it. And you're just...
It's easy to laugh about things like that, but again, when you do have folk like ourselves who are immersed in that political world, I would love to have a brass plaque above the door of every activist's office that just says, on the way out, you are now leaving the bubble. Just as a reminder that the stuff that we do every single day is a distant and alien world to a lot of people. It's not necessarily a bad thing that's the case, but we do need to bear that in mind when we're making political decisions and advocating for views. It's
true, though we do see that people are starting to become political activists even without any of the knowledge. So it's not like it's just the informed people having to leave their bubble. There's political activism without the informed opinions behind it. So.
Well, the mainstream media isn't helping. I mean, they certainly have disguised the reality of what Brexit truly means to the individual at home. And this is probably the reason why there's, some activists in London which are quite aggressive about not being able to express their view or have their views as they perceived it was going to be enacted. And it's a dangerous road to follow, but certainly the alternative media, and I guess I'll just say this is for people who have to make it their business to try and understand what's going on. But sadly, there's so many folk that just don't want to get engaged because it's combative argument on television or even talking to their friends to try and find out. they're actually discouraged from getting involved, and that's a bad thing. People need to be engaged to find out what's going to happen to them, their children, their grandchildren. And this is what I'd like to see more of, is people actually getting engaged and involved.
I think we're seeing something really interesting, which is the fact that the Orange Order flute band is in Westminster. There is real engagement. Fishing for Leave is an organisation started up by somebody who is from Scotland. So suddenly the nationalists, the British nationalists from Scotland, are actually making sure that they're down and have a presence in London. This is something that is somewhat of a new development, or one that has gone under the radar up until now.
I think it's always been there. They're just actually just exercising their voice now because they're frightened that something may happen that will leave them exposed and isolated. I mean, Northern Ireland generally is, for politics point of view, in my opinion, isolated from the mainstream media, specifically because they're far away. And as one of my colleagues had mentioned in a speech the other day there, the reference of the Troubles was kind of isolated within the North, when in fact it actually was a UK civil war. It was easier to compartmentalise it into a Northern issue, and therefore the media tends to be, from that part of the planet, just off-site. So now they're beginning to become vocal and visible. I think we'll see more of that in the coming days.
It's all a different kind of bubble, isn't it?
It is.
It always gets a bit uncomfortable when someone comes along and pops it.
It does, yeah.
I think that's true for all sides involved. Whatever you believe in or what you believe to be true, it's very difficult to revert your identity because you base your entire worldview around that. So it's a difficult one to crack, I think, for all people. People are extremely passionate about Brexit, often extremely uninformed about Brexit. How do you change that dynamic? Because clearly there is more facts coming out about it. We all know that it's going to have a detrimental impact. We now have more information on Brexit, though it's by no means like a finished affair. But we have more information about Brexit now and what it means for the UK than we did at the time when you guys got the vote about it. I didn't.
Well, polarising views is one thing. I mean, certainly the guys referring to the flute band earlier, they've got a lot to lose should there be a unification of Ireland. This really rails against exactly what they're all about. So therefore, they're going straight to the head of the dragon to Downing Street to let them know in no uncertain terms, we're still here and we're still part of the UK, whether you like it or not. So it's interesting days ahead regarding what these guys will do to proceed. And
it's worth noting that while we've kind of been talking about the level of knowledge in activists and in the public, we can't forget that there have been quite a few, even MPs, who have shown that they've got very limited knowledge of the EU and its structures and the consequences of it.
That's right.
And that's quite a serious problem.
I believe there was a sort of tweet going around about several MPs booking into educational classes on what the customs union is in the first place. This is like coming up this week.
But the Minister for leaving the EU not realising the significance of Dover and Calais for transporting of freight, it just beggars belief. I mean, this is just absolutely appalling on the biggest scale of appalling can go. So when you realise when you've got guys like that in charge, God help us all, you know.
I've been quite sort of encouraged by the fact that these indicative votes have happened, because they are a way of trying to thrash out these options, but there's still some part of me that says that this would have been a really good idea to do in July 2016. Or even before the referendum.
Completely.
It's a little bit late now.
Had we known what we'd known now, hindsight's a great thing, but certainly it's a burach, a big burach, and it's really quite exciting but also frightening at the same time to see what's going to pan out.
It is. If we're talking about the next week, Monday kicks off with what looks to be like the fourth time that Theresa May's deal is going to be brought back in front of the House of Commons. Do we expect any different results, gentlemen?
It depends. It depends what's been said over the weekend. I mean, there's obviously phone calls, frantic phone calls, you know, private meetings of how do we get this through, and there may well be some, you know, encouraging offers to certain people, whether there's bad information against them or there's good positive things to happen. Who knows? I mean, this kind of Machiavellian plots will be going on to make sure this thing gets through, but I doubt it very much indeed personally whether it will go through.
I thought last week was quite interesting because the indicative votes were quite a refreshing change. At least, I mean, we can criticise that process all we like, but at least it was people trying to make constructive plans come together. On the other hand, I found it quite interesting that all the MPs had the opportunity to vote for more than one of the options provided, and it doesn't look like a lot of people went for the option of selecting more options than one.
Yeah, I don't expect the meaningful vote for to pass. I think we saw the first one had a majority against of over 200, was it? Then the second one was about 150 odd. The last one was 58.
Yep.
So there have been people crossing the line, but Theresa May still got the problem is she has nothing to offer groups like the DUP. She's got nothing to offer the last few holdouts of the ERG. So unless she can offer something to, say, the Labour Party that doesn't alienate her own supporters, which again, probably impossible, I just don't see how she gets the numbers.
Yeah, I think about 75% of the MPs are pro-Remain, so she's up against it no matter how she slices and dices it. So she really has a tough gig to follow through, and certainly it's a bit disingenuous to say that nobody else is bringing up any other ideas when she refuses point blank to talk to people. Yeah. So it's a bit late in the day, 3 years down the line, to suddenly say, look, woe is me, you're all ganging up against me. She's caused it herself, and therefore it's really going to be quite interesting. I'm sure there's lots of popcorn being bought and sold for the next coming days.
Yeah, I think one of the options that we should probably spend a brief moment on is the possibility of a general election. I think it's an interesting topic because there are voices out there that say that specifically in Scotland for Labour that would be absolutely detrimental.
Yeah.
And that this might be one of the reasons that Labour is not actually shouting for that in the capacity that they could, and they would be in the position to bring it about at this point.
Yeah, well, it's a case of who wants to be in charge of a runaway bus without a steering wheel. But it's a really, really hot potato. But certainly my preference would be for a general election if the SNP stood on the basis that, you know, a mandate would give them rights to call for independence right away without a further referendum.
From the kind of UK party's perspective, I can see why Labour, though, would prefer a general election to, say, the people's vote, because the general election wins them more. It gets them the Brexit they want, and it gives them power. It's quite interesting that their support for a people's vote is contingent on only if the general election doesn't happen, because of course they don't want a general election that they win, they then put forward the Brexit they want, and then it gets rejected in a people's vote.
Or by the European Union, because they say there's no more discussions. So what would
this change? Is the thing, we're having this discussion about what the UK wants, and again, we're forgetting the other side of the table.
I think the EU should be getting used to it. Scotland has been for a good long time.
Well, they're beginning to understand what Scotland and the rest of the home countries have to put up with dealing with Westminster. I mean, this is an exceptionally bad government, an exceptionally bad opposition. And the fact is that Scotland should be really taking advantage of the situation to its own advantage, but we'll see.
Yeah, we've also seen that there's been quite some severe abuse of MPs leaving their workplace and going into their workplace in the past week. I think another interesting piece of news that we received this week is that the independent group is now officially becoming a party and have chosen a very unfortunate abbreviation for their new party name. One that is they've called themselves Change, which is being challenged by the website in court because obviously Change UK has direct connotations. So the abbreviation is CUK. So how do we feel about this group finally becoming an official party?
It was probably inevitable from the moment they announced that they were going to try this. I heard that there's the possibility that they're trying to form some sort of electoral pact or coalition with the Lib Dems, or some sort of at least arrangement, strategic arrangement. It probably makes sense. They're probably closely aligned policy-wise. The big problem with UK politics is it has the first past the post electoral system, so breaking in with a new party is always going to be near impossible. So it will be interesting to see how they do in a general election.
Well, the fact that we've seen so much abuse this week and it's really ramped up, I think we can see that the UK is getting quite desperate. The population of the UK is getting very enraged. But we've also seen contempt within Westminster, not only from the Prime Minister towards her Parliament, but also from within the opposition party. I remember that there was a piece on Corbyn walking out of a meeting because he encountered people that had left Labour to join the independent group. there's a sort of petulance and inability to just have a straightforward conversation, no matter who sits on your table. And it's kind of included in your job role. You're there to discuss and debate with all sides of the group. That's why you're sitting in that old building.
But the mainstream media has a part to play in this. I mean, the fact that Corbyn gets doorstepped by BBC and STV, and we find that Theresa May, apart from Boris, I think is the only exception, they are encouraging this kind of confrontational discussion. I think there's a web blogger at the moment in time who goes around doorstepping, or not doorstepping, but just confronting MPs on the street, which to me, okay, is fair enough to a certain extent, but we encourage it. This whole thing is being encouraged by the media, and I think it's going to get worse before it gets better.
Completely. Joanna Cherry was told to go back home this week.
And so was Ian in Westminster. I mean, this is, you hear the abuse that's been shouted, and now people are emboldened by this kind of stuff that they see on a regular basis, and they feel it's perfectly natural. I mean, I even heard of a colleague being told, why are you still here? You're supposed to go home. Because people feel that that's the right thing to do. They've won some kind of prize that allows them to have a white United Kingdom. I just find it rather bizarre and very, very sad.
Yeah, I have seen some disturbing videos, even through the Leave protests over the last few days, up to including sort of dragging effigies of politicians through the street. There's some very, very dangerous politics coming out. It has to be condemned at all levels, because the UK is walking down a very dark path. It really should be very careful about where it's heading.
Yeah, and we've heard these warnings for quite some time. I think it started out with the campaign for Brexit, but we are now far beyond just populist politics.
Yeah.
We are reaching and breaching the fascist kind of out in force.
And the sad thing, this has been normalised by the media. This has obviously been normalised, and it has been for several years. When you look at the red tops, you know, the Daily Mail and the Express, and nobody had done anything about it. I mean, even Leveson was knocked back for the second version, which should have nipped this thing in the bud. So there is a general narrative that this is okay, provided whoever is organising this narrative is trying to get what they want. And there is some certain people who do benefit from Brexit happening, and these sadly are usually people with bad prejudice about foreigners, for want of a better word, and people with lots of money interests. So these are the guys that are quite keen to see this go through.
I'm not surprised by it as a German EU national, somebody who has been raised in the context of a country that really has to look at its history and continue to look at it. I'm not surprised, having lived in the UK for more than half my life now. This is a country that likes to pride itself in thinking that it could never happen here. We're in the middle of that situation. This is how this happens, and the UK is so happy to self-delude that, you know, there's British nationalists on the streets saying my grandfather fought in the war,
Mosley,
while raising their own hands to a Hitler salute. It's unbelievable, unbelievable, but very real. It's not a surprising thing if you don't deal with your past in a way that is responsible. If you don't understand that the failings of humanity are the failings of all humanity, and it's all our responsibility to stand up for what is right, you will exclude yourself, and by that you fail to learn the lessons from history.
Exactly.
So, 29th was Brexit Day, or it was no Brexit Day. There's been some mild celebrations around that, even though we just seem to have postponed the whole thing for another 12 days or so. How do you feel, Craig, about how this is going to play out in the next 2 weeks?
It's really ramping up the uncertainty. There are going to be consequences for this. I mean, businesses were planning for, you know, this, you know, the 29th to be the cliff edge for them, and it's suddenly not. So they're having to deal with supply chains that, you know, have 6-week lag times, and suddenly the cliff has been moved by a couple of weeks. That's going to be very difficult to adapt to. And will it lead to anything other than just pushing the date of the no-deal cliff edge back a few days? We don't know. But we're in very uncertain times, very disturbingly uncertain.
In the absence of any good options and any options that the majority of MPs can actually agree to, the default position continues to be no deal.
We've no idea what they can say. I mean, the 12th of April is quite apt. It's the anniversary of the sinking of the Titanic. So I don't know whether it was they knew that when they chose the date, but who knows? I mean, the EU have quite clearly stated that The documents that we have agreed to were the documents that you wanted. We've agreed to it. There is no change. So what can change between now and the 12th? I have no idea. And possibly the EU would be of a mind that if Theresa said, you know what, I'm just handing in my jotters, that's it, I've had enough, we're going to have an election, maybe these guys will have another go at it. But again, as they have said, their position is fixed. So what Jeremy Corbyn's expecting, I just have absolutely no idea.
No.
You know, and whether he can get it through Parliament, the same as Theresa couldn't, I don't see how they could.
Very true. This week is another piece of news, which was that the Vote Leave campaign has been again fined for illegal tactics within the Brexit referendum. That was, I think, 61k. If we put that together with the other couple of fines that they've gotten for illegal proceedings, I don't think we're much past 100, maybe 200,000 pound. If you were a campaign manager, do you feel like that would be a fantastic investment in running a completely dirty campaign?
It's like analogy of football. If somebody's in a position where they're going to score a goal and they're going to kick the ball just outside, is it worth taking a penalty for? And chances are, yeah, because you might get away with it.
Yeah, the fines in this are too low. They can just be costed into the price of business for overspending, for cheating, for campaigning illegally. The penalties for doing that have to be ramped up seriously. Especially in this age of digital campaigning. Commonweal published a paper a little while ago on the risks in abuse of data, especially on social media data. Right now, anyone who's familiar with producing political leaflets, if you do it within the campaigning period, you've got to have a little imprint saying who is promoting the work. Those rules don't apply to digital campaigning at the moment. I think the Electoral Commission's looking at it, but and we're at the stage where you can be targeted individually with political messages that I can be targeted to not see. So we end up being campaigned to in completely different ways, and we cannot address each other fairly. That's quite corrosive to a democracy.
Oh, completely, and it's not something that just could potentially happen. It is happening.
It is happening,
a great example of that is citizens' rights.
Yeah.
We have been bombarded as EU citizens based in the UK, bombarded for the last 2.5 years by Home Office advertisements that, by the way, all of you and all of us paid for, to say a deal has been reached, your rights are protected. Obviously, even just by clicking on the link, the British government has an idea of who responds to these ads. I'm pretty sure neither of you has been targeted with these ads.
No.
Seems extremely unlikely. Obviously, the truth content of these ads is also questionable and very tailored to the people that you're addressing it to.
Yeah.
So this is already happening, and this is just a wee example. This isn't even in a campaigning kind of...
It's amazing. In Scotland, we've had an ex-First Minister have to resign because of expenses, and Wendy Alexander had to resign for, I think it was less than £300 donation. And if you take it into perspective between what has happened with the Leave campaign, where the whole country is now being ripped apart because of a situation and nothing happens, there's something rotten about the politics, certainly down south.
Yeah, the targeted political ads I tend to see are from the Scotland office telling me how great and wonderful Scotland is within the UK.
Yeah.
Well, you are the target audience for those. Today is the first day in which EU citizens will not have a legal recourse to challenge decisions made by the Home Office about settled status. So we find ourselves in a unique position. On top of that, it is currently not possible for EU citizens to apply for settled status because the site has crashed. And this is the second day in a row. We've been, over the last couple of months, speaking to you as the audience about what settled status means and how it violates various rights, including privacy and the right to know what information is used in order to make decisions about our status. But we're now finding ourselves in a position where no matter what the decision is, there is no legal way of actually fighting it. While Scotland continues to be welcoming and verbal about it, EU citizens in Scotland or anywhere else in the UK are in no way protected from the outfall from this. And as an EU citizen, I have to say that I have absolutely no desire to apply for settled status if that means running down the clock to December 2020 and then being having to make the choice between being an illegal without an official status in the UK, as long as Scotland is part of the UK. Unfortunately, I have to abide by those rules. This is the next deadline that we're walking into. We can all just wish EU citizens good luck with that, and I can only wish the Scottish Government a lot of faith and hope and energy and bravery to deal with these issues in the name of all of the EU residents and all new Scots in Scotland. So moving on from that, Ukraine and Slovenia had elections. There has been, Slovakia, excuse me, the far right has been a very strong force in the Eastern European areas, but there's a great pushback that we're experiencing now, and maybe Craig, you want to speak about how the Russian threat to potentially enter those territories is now playing out?
I have to say I haven't been following these elections too closely, so I don't really know the details of quite what's going on there. But yeah, we have seen this new generational thing coming through. So, I mean, it's been almost 30 years since the breakup of the Soviet Union and these countries regaining their independence. So yeah, you have a generation of people now who are now adults who have always lived in their independent country, and this is kind of what happens when countries find their identity, and it takes years and decades to go through that process. But you know, if we can see more encouraging things than the retreat to far right radicalism and populism, then yeah, it's encouraging. We should be paying more attention to these. I should be paying more attention to these elections.
It's quite difficult to keep up with all the countries around us, but especially the ones where we're starting to see a real pushback against the far right. It's a lesson that we need to be very aware of.
I mean, Ukraine has a border with Hungary, and I've travelled there and visited there many times, and the European Union in itself grants a lot of businesses in the Ukraine side, particularly the border side, money particularly to encourage investment, additional investment, and encourage work to stop a migration of people from a relatively poor and underdeveloped country into the European Union. So they're not chasing away foreigners in inverted commas, they're actually trying to create a business whereby everybody can benefit from, because certainly the labour rates in Ukraine are relatively cheap compared to Central Europe, that there is benefits for both. They can manufacture products cheaply, they can be imported across the border at relative less expense, and obviously the Soviet Union, or the Soviet Russia, is quite concerned that this is possibly a threat to their own manufacturing lifestyles if there is going to be a cheap mini China, certainly just off the EU. So it's encouraging to see it happening. I just hate to think that politics are getting involved from people with vested interests to try and disrupt what should be a fairly straightforward process and a nice process.
It's quite interesting because the newly elected candidate, or the new president of Slovakia, is a female. It's the first female that is there, and she is a lawyer, an activist and a lawyer, and she has been campaigning specifically against corruption.
She's 45 years old, which is even good. We're getting younger people in,
That's good news. Let's have more of that.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on from there, let's talk about Progress Scotland. Progress Scotland was announced not all that long ago. I think it started at the beginning of the year.
Yeah.
Do you recall what the initial idea of it was?
Well, this is the SNP's Angus Robertson keeping a foothold in politics. He's starting to do more polls and focus groups and studying the social attitudes in Scotland towards independence, and trying to find what messages would appeal to voters. So some of the data is starting to prove quite interesting. The first round of his polls were published this week. So we've all been poring over them, especially the data geeks like me.
What was the thing that really stood out for you this week in terms of what came back from that polling? Well,
the attitude that there is a substantial majority of people now believe that Scotland will become independent at some point, that Scotland deserves to make that choice at some point, and the numbers there exceed the number of people who actively support independence. So a lot of current no voters believe that Scotland should have another referendum and believe that Scotland will be independent, even if they personally don't agree with it. I've met people who hold that view, that they would vote no in a second referendum, but they think eventually there will be a referendum and they think they'll lose it.
Yeah. I think there was quite a lot of interesting numbers that now they seem to be releasing different sets of data that they've collected over the next couple of days. I think the most recent one had to do with currency. How would you, from a perspective of somebody who's really into data and is very interested in polling, how would you approach the methodology of that kind of polling?
So the poll that came out of Progress Scotland said that there was a substantial majority of voters who would prefer to continue to use the pound post-independence. I would say that this is an argument that, while it has been very passionately discussed within the activist set, like me, I won't pretend that I've not been at the front of this. It's not an argument that has spilled out into the general public yet, so there hasn't been the detailed discussion of what the different currency options for Scotland would mean. You know, if we keep the pound, what happens if there is a financial crisis in London and Scotland doesn't have the tools to protect Scotland against it or mitigate it? Then we could get dragged under with it. That's one of the consequences that, you know, sterlingisation, keeping the pound unofficially, would mean. So balance that risk against the risks and challenges of setting up a new currency that could protect you against that, but is quite an involved process to do. You know, these are the discussions that we have to start having.
How do you feel the general population is in terms of education, clued up on these issues so far? Similar
to Brexit, we haven't had those discussions out there, so people don't really have an opinion per se.
An informed opinion. They may have an opinion, right?
The closest thing we've got is decimalisation, I would imagine, and decimalisation, people found it fairly straightforward, and others of a certain generation just felt that it was the invention of the devil. It was mental. We still have people today still counting pounds and ounces and refusing point blank a statement of fact that they will never ever change. But these are the minority. I mean, it's not a deal breaker, I don't think, in my opinion, that whether Scotland sticks with it or goes with their own currency.
That's actually something that we've found in our research and has been backed up by Progress Scotland's research, is people are more concerned about the state of the economy as a whole. Yeah, the currency is either down the list or it's used as a kind of a surrogate argument. You know, if you don't know what you're doing with the currency, then can you be trusted to run the economy? that's kind of the argument that happened in 2014.
If you can't organise a vote, should you be in charge of the country?
Exactly. This is how a lot of people go through that process. If you can't be trusted with getting things right on my doorstep, how can you be trusted on the bigger issues? And that's how you have to start proving that you can do this, that you do have a plan for it, that it is a logical plan, a rational plan, and that it makes sense, and you can deliver on that promise.
Absolutely. Another interesting point from Progress Scotland's polling, I thought, was the decisions over Scotland's relationship with the European Union should be made by the Scottish Parliament or government. 75% of respondents agreed with that statement. Again, we're finding ourselves at the point where we have to understand that Brexit and EU membership are core issues that don't split the Scottish nation along yes and no voting lines. This is an issue where a lot of people feel very similar, and even for that, even people who wouldn't necessarily vote or haven't necessarily voted for independence the first time round still feel that Holyrood should be the determinating factor in how our relationship with Europe looks.
There's a curious phenomenon in social attitude polling in Scotland where the percentage of people who believe that all decisions about Scotland should be made in Scotland is far higher than the people that believe that Scotland should be an independent country. I think it's kind of a reflection of just how polling questions work sometimes. Anyone who's familiar with Yes Minister can back up the jokes about how you can kind of get the result you want from just by wording a poll carefully. But yeah, people in Scotland do genuinely want the decisions affecting them to be made here. it's just then convincing folk that the way to do that is independence. If all the decisions for Scotland are made in Scotland, then by tautology that means an independent country.
It does, unless you really believe the Devo Max lie, which is we can have all the rules. Well, we can have all the power, but we still need somebody to keep a rein on us, just in case we're not handling it well.
Yeah, that's just a confidence issue.
That's generally the general public who vote you out every 5 years. Should be the proof stone. But again, just to reference the fact that there is a majority of people, I would say, that are not interested in politics until it actually interferes with them, whether they lose their job because their company's moving out, or because their son's lost their job, or their pension's been cut back or delayed. This is when people start to realise and understand that they need to listen and find out more about what's going on, because their lives have now been touched by politics. And I think we're still a long, long way away, because we have this mainstream media that's deliberately out there to cocoon the people from that kind of reality.
So to what degree, considering that there is no campaign ongoing currently in Scotland?
There is.
Well,
it's people like us that are doing it. I mean, we're constantly doing it. It's never stopped, and it should never stop. It should always be never wait for a starting gun, because the Unionist side have been doing it since 1707.
this is true, and you know, the status quo often doesn't need to defend itself. This is exactly the challenge that we're facing at the minute. So given that there's no official campaign going on, and that the grassroots are the ones that are trying to take charge in the absence of an official campaign
and they
being
always
called,
will be,
how much value do you assign to polling like that of Progress Scotland's?
It's just a snapshot. I mean, it's just a snapshot. I mean, I dare say he had I'm trying to think of the recent smear that we had from Westminster about Scotland, something about stats or numbers of we've got a 15 billion deficit, and then you poll immediately after that, you tend to find that you may get a drop. I don't know, Craig, you probably know better than I. But the only one poll that works on the day is the actual the vote day. You know.
From your perspective, since iScot has a lot of fantastic connections throughout all the grassroots, oh, you do amazing work. But what is the mood like in the grassroots? What do you feel?
Well, we recently had a tour of north of Scotland, as far as Orkney, and there are a lot of people who are really getting impatient that, just to paraphrase, you know, look at what happens in Westminster, look what the opposition is like, why are we not taking advantage of this? I mean, it just doesn't make sense, and there are a few people coming out saying more or less wheesht for Indy, or just keep quiet, there is a plan, somebody's doing something. But you have to keep the troops motivated, you have to keep them on side, and at this minute in time, a few people are saying that if we lose this opportunity to take our own decision to have an independent referendum, rather than, as we saw last week in the National, where the SNP demanded permission, we're never ever going to get it. You don't demand permission, you take that decision to hold it yourself and bugger the consequences.
Well, in that context, I think it's important to see where we're at, and there may be lots of differing opinions. But at some point, it's important to understand that no matter how enthusiastic we are about independence, no matter how much we trust the leaders that have been elected, what you said earlier about a mandate through a general election, it's not like the SNP doesn't hold a mandate already. They hold several mandates.
They don't believe they have it. I mean, they don't believe they have it. But remember, the arguments about don't call it now because we might lose. Well, what's the point in entering any race or any event asking people to put up? We had 25%, I think it was a percentage when we started into F1, and ended up allegedly at 45%. So I think that you have made up your mind, do you want to be an independent country? This idea of helping England from themselves, to me, is just a complete and utter waste of time. Really, we don't have the numbers to change or otherwise. Let's focus on our own country and you know, see if people in England can realise that we're leading by example.
I don't think I could have said that any better. Have you got anything to add, Craig?
Yeah, just on the activist mood, and I don't mean this as a kind of business plug, but one of the books that Commonwealth published, How to Start a New Country, has recently seen a massive spike in sales. People are kind of thirsting for the knowledge on how to go through that process. And,
give you a discount for advertising.
I'll maybe give you a copy if you don't
Thank
have it already. Yeah, people really are wanting to get this detailed knowledge because the activists are getting ready for being out on the street and talking to friends and talking to family, and they're obviously getting asked these questions as well, and they want to know the answers. So yeah, there's a bit of an energy it's bubbling up there.
What we've heard from the Scottish Government and the SNP leadership is a lot about we need to move the polls. I think that's quite a contentious way of going about things. If the polls are looking too positive, then getting any sort of permission from Westminster seems even more illusionary than...
This is just daft. I mean, it's really daft. We didn't have the polls with us in the DRF1, but we decided to go for it because the first time in 300 odd years that we could exercise our voice. Why suddenly say that we have to wait until we're going to guarantee win it? You would never back a horse on the basis of that, unless you knew fine well it was absolutely going to win, in which case, what odds would you get? We just need to take advantage of the situation at the minute in time, where there's a great deal of people, more than I think that we'd imagine, that supports independence, and seeing what's happening down south, realise that if we're going to get our throats cut, we might as well do it ourselves. And we couldn't do any worse. And if your folks that are listening today take the opportunity of looking up the elephant rope, which is about elephants and about ropes and conditioning and how you're conditioned to think a certain way, we have no other option than to go for independence, because it isn't going to get any better. Nobody says on TV that this Brexit is going to make anybody the same. We'll be worse off. Everybody will be worse off, apart from those with a vested interest to make it happen financially. And if you've got children, grandchildren, elderly folks, anybody in family is going to be disadvantaged by this move. And therefore it's just common sense that you don't expose yourself to danger, and we need to get out of this mess, and independence to me is the only route that we have to see fairness for everybody.
How do the grassroots, how do people at home up the pressure? This is clearly something that seems to be in the interest.
They have to get involved. They can't just stand back and say, oh, my husband or my wife decides this stuff for me, I don't listen, I just listen to what they say. You need to get involved. You just cannot hang about. You need to understand what's going on and decide for yourself. You need to speak to people, friends and family, and direct them or guide them. You can't convince anybody to vote for independence. You have to just show them the benefits and the disadvantages of our current situation, and hope that they see common sense. But when you see what's happening now, particularly Swindon, losing, and I believe Swindon was a high leave area, if I remember correctly. These people have voted for their own extinction, and now they're complaining to the company that's leaving, you know, we need you to stay here. And I'm sure the Japanese are not daft, you know.
And just as important as speaking to people, you know, listen to people as well. Find out the issues that are concerning people, and you know, find out, you know, what kind of messages they would respond to. Because the argument that convinced you towards independence, me towards independence, you towards independence might be completely different. We all got there, but we might have got there for different reasons, and that will be true for people who haven't quite got there yet.
I think the conversations is not the part that I was asking about. Of course we need to campaign and we need to speak to people directly, but this is about upping the pressure in Scotland. What chance do the grassroots have, as long as there's going to be brakes put on from those that, you know, got elected to deliver independence? So how do people at home up the pressure? Step
up. They just have to step up in whatever way they deem appropriate, whatever their lifestyle will allow them, whether it be handing out leaflets, whether it's turning up at a meeting, whether it's writing blogs, whether it's buying media and distributing media to other folk. You have to do what you can do.
Lobbying your elected representatives as well.
Contributing to Broadcasting Scotland.
Well, yeah, exactly. But also speaking to the present SNP and saying to them that if we don't have an independence referendum by the time we go for another, when they already have the mandate and then we go to a general election, I think they will be severely hurt in the polls, because they had the opportunity, they've been given the mandate. It's up to them now to take that and use it appropriately, rather than wait to see England fail before they can gain an advantage. That is not the way to go about securing victory. You don't wait for somebody else to fail.
We can see that there's quite a lot of frustration happening with the SNP leadership, and there's a lot of struggle around constructive criticism versus just being dismissed out of hand. Can we have a couple of minutes of discussion on how constructive criticism should be given and also how it should be received?
Well, constructive criticism should be received as constructive criticism. There's a lot of people that certainly don't understand the difference between argument and abuse, and these are the people you have to just, park to the side. But you should be able to speak to people and say, I disagree with what you're doing. That's the whole point of debate and being part of an organisation. Otherwise, it just turns out to be a cult, in which case we want no part of it,
Yeah, I mean, I work for a lobby group and a think tank. Our role there is to advocate for views, some of which will be so the government of the day might be amenable to and it will accept, and we will always congratulate them when they're taking the right step, as far as as we define it, as we see it. But we will also criticise when they're moving away from our ideals as well. That's the purpose of lobbying, and constructive criticism is a vital part of that. So it should always be welcomed. The old tradition of the Naismiths there to test your ideas and to improve them through that criticism is a valuable thing, and it should be encouraged.
I think you're absolutely right. It also has to do with the thing that you mentioned about having the brass plaque with the bubble. Yeah. That's not only true for being politically active or not politically active. As soon as you're in the echo chamber of people who think like you, that closes you off to other opinions, and we are in desperate need of a diversity of opinions that allow us to form constructive, progressive policies for Scotland. So it's important to listen, it's important not to just dismiss, not to tar everybody with the same brush just because they bring a criticism of something that you are a part of. In the same way that it is important to not just pile on to people for holding a certain opinion, change minds with arguments and not with insults.
Yeah.
That's how I feel.
Sadly, Twitter and Facebook aren't conducive to that type of clear debate.
And I think all of us have to, this is an extremely personal matter, this is not an institutional matter. As soon as we enter the realm of personal commentary, like on Twitter, all of us have to really consider how we word things, how we interact with other people, and how we perceive opinion. It can be very easy to get dragged in. And we've had a couple of talks around Scotland. I've been to an awful lot in the last couple of months. This is something that's come up over and over again, and even activists and bloggers admitting they personally also struggle with this. We're all so existentially impacted by the issues that we're facing today that it's extremely difficult to keep down the angry in ourselves that is frustrated and just wants to burst out. We have to continue to work on being constructive about the things that we say and do. So, moving on from there, today is Mother's Day. Because it's Mother's Day, usually Broadcasting Scotland tries to have a fairly balanced panel, but today I'll just be two women here to counterbalance the two of you. Is there anything special that you're intending to do for Mother's Day?
Well, I know that my mum's watching the stream right now, so hi Mum, happy Mother's Day. I'll be home soon, I'll make your dinner for you.
I would need a Ouija board. Fortunately, my mum passed away many years, but yeah, have a fun day, and I hope the game goes very well if you're taking your mum to the football match. Hope everybody wins.
So for me, it's not Mother's Day yet. German Mother's Day falls on a different day, and I'm always lucky because I have the excuse to miss it now and to miss it then because I only had the UK dates in mind. However, every day is Mother's Day, and if you do speak to her or somebody who's fulfilled a mother-like role in your life or that continues to do so, just be kind, be sweet to them. We've had one more story that I think may have been easy to miss. The Saudis apparently hacked into the phone of the CEO of Amazon, Jeff Bezos, and this has been confirmed by the security chief of Amazon. On the surface, this seems like a strange sort of irrelevant story until you look into why this might have taken place. Have you had a look at this story, Craig?
I only found out about this story just as we were prepping for the show today, so I've only been able to briefly skim over it. Yeah, we are in this realm of the relationship between states and multinational megacorporations. And yeah, there's some interesting spy novels to be written about this sort of thing. One would have hoped that a company as large as Amazon would have been able to secure itself a little more tightly than it apparently has, but you know, even the best security companies get hacked now and then.
Was it $1 million gold encrusted diamond studded phone he was given by any chance?
It seems to have to do with connections to the media that Jeff Bezos has. He also owns a newspaper who has very closely been looking into the Khashoggi murders.
Yeah.
And because of that, this appears to have been enough reason for the Saudis to take a special interest in his phone and his personal information. So we're now breaching the limits between personal data, trying to you know, Jeff Bezos has enough to do and his hands full with Amazon and whatever he's doing with that company. But this is an external link over another company and a media outlet, and whose stories are now impacting the CEO of a company that is otherwise not really affiliated with the newspapers that these stories were published in.
I think this is all too common. I mean, one of our journalists, who you know, had his phone cloned by the UK authorities, and he had that verified when he got back to his home country. So it happens to a lot of folk, more than you'd imagine. And to be fair, any state security would be daft if they didn't have an interest in what was going on.
It does put this particular story does put the UK in an interesting position, because of course Saudi Arabia and the US are supposedly allies of the UK. So if two of the UK's allies are if one of them spying on the other, then what does that say about the friend of our friend, to invert a saying?
Yeah, personally at the minute I'm not holding a very high opinion of UK-made programs, considering that settled status is going so fantastically that it shut down on the first day of official full service operations.
But of course there's all the data implications there as well.
Oh, big time.
So I wonder if I would hope that the Home Office is applying rigorous standards of data to how they store that.
It is very unlikely. I've mentioned this before, but the first screen that you get to once you download the Settled Status app is actually one where you agree to the British government taking all your information that you input, regardless of the outcome of your application, and for them to be able to share it with whomever they please. We already do not have the right to know the information that the Home Office holds, but they're also able to share even our biometric data with whomever. I will never find out. This is one of the reasons why applying for settled status is an extremely precarious thing to do. For the rest of your life, your biometric data will be floating out into the ether.
It will be sold to insurance companies when eventually the NHS is disbanded and private companies come in, and that will define what your premium will be per month. So this is where we're heading to.
And on the security side of that, even if the Home Office does have the highest level of security over how they are storing your data, how about the person they've sold it to, or the company they've sold it to?
Oh, absolutely.
So who knows where it'll end up?
Yeah, as soon as you release that beast, it just takes on a life of its own, and that's just how it is. It's an impossible situation to be put into. The only way for me to legally obtain a legal status in this country is to go through this app. But it's not a secure option for the rest of my life. And even settled status is just a temporary status. This doesn't grant me any permanent rights. It's something that needs to be renewed and upheld. So in terms of that, the UK government has been using programming and programs and their own IT systems in a very innovative way that they have been very proud to speak about, but in a very dangerous way. And when it comes to data hacking, I think these are examples where we just need to start to listen properly. At the minute in Scotland, it applies to 200,000 EU nationals, UK-wide over 3 million nationals. This also applies to partners of EU nationals. This is specifically true for banking data, for example. If you have a shared account and you're married to an EU citizen while they're being investigated, it is perfectly possible for the Home Office to shut down your shared account. Tough. And you won't be able to find out why that happened, and you have no straightforward route to appeal. So on that cheerful note, we're starting to get to the end of the programme. Is there anything that you hope to see from the next week? I know we're heading into more of Brexit land and it's getting very swampy, but is there anything that you're hoping for?
Personally, I'm hoping for a bit of sun because I'm on holiday this week and I hope to just put everything to the side. I don't think I will the way things are going, but a few days of peace would be amazing.
That sounds good. You can.
I would just like to see somebody within the Scottish Government say, look, enough is enough. We just have to say, you know, look after ourselves. We can't save everybody, but we can save ourselves, and let's start putting in a plan to make that happen, rather than hoping that somebody else loses in order that we can win. We have to do it in our own rights, and we are our own salvation. So that's what I'd like to see, some action, some positive action for Scotland.
If Ken's wish comes true, yours won't. Just making sure that you're both aware that
Oh well.
You got the sky.
Would you be willing to give up your holiday for that kind of news?
Back to the coalface it is.
Absolutely. And on that cheerful note, thank you for watching Broadcasting Scotland. This was the Full Scottish for Sunday, and we're hoping to see you tomorrow for News at 7. Have a good night. Mother's Day. Bye.